Good evening. Hey guys, hello. It's nice seeing you guys. Oh, hold on. There we go. It's nice to see you guys again. Okay, let me scooch myself up a little bit. How are you guys doing? Thank you guys so much for your patience. I'm so sorry about that. I got home a little later than I thought I would, and I was like, ah, shit, I did not eat yet. I gotta eat. I'm doing good, but yeah, I just ate some good food. I just had my dinner, so I'm happy. I had a Caesar salad, which I'm not gonna lie, I've been craving a Caesar salad, and like, listen. Packaged salad kits, like this one specifically from Walmart, is absolutely amazing. It's amazing when I'm in a crunch, especially like, oh god, the right amount of it has the right amount of dressing that I love on my salads. I love to drown it. No, I better not hear you fucking shitting on my fucking Caesar salad ever again. Don't talk to me or my son ever again. Oh god. It isn't for everyone, but hey, I think it's delicious. I personally love it, especially if it's like drowned in dressing. Wow, I just like died when I was getting a drink of Coke. Oh, it's delicious. I highly recommend it, especially if you're like a picky eater. I used to be very picky when it comes to my eating habits, and I asked my friends a long time ago when I was starting to branch out what foods they would recommend. They say that Caesar is the best just because it's not as overwhelming like as other salads can be if you're not used to that, if your palate isn't used to it. And it's so good. It's 100% worth it. Mm. Fair enough. I personally am very like on the fence about like the Coke and Pepsi thing. Honestly, I'm gonna be the minority here, or like have the unpopular opinion here and just say they kind of taste the same, but Coke is a little spicier. It just feels, I don't know if that makes sense. I just feel like Coke has a bit of a spicier sort of feel, kind of like Pepsi. I imagine Pepsi is like the very chill uncle, and then you have the fucking rocker uncle with fucking Coke. That's how I imagine it personally. I love it. Let's see. Oh god. Hello. Anyways, so let me see where we are in the story. That is fair enough. That's where I was going with that. Okay. Carbonation is spicy. And yeah, I agree. Pepsi does have like a lot less carbonation than Coke, I've noticed, and it's delicious. Alright. So, with that being said, we are going to jump into right back into Another by Yukito Ayatsuji. And I know we definitely had a bit of a long break from streaming for a little bit just because of my break. But we should be able to get caught up. I have a lot of energy, so I feel like I can definitely knock out quite a few chapters. And then we'll be all caught up and ready to go. So yeah, let's jump over to our reading room. And then we'll get started on that. So, right over here. Okay, let me make sure everything is all good. One little difference I'm going to have is I'm probably going to add the rain in post editing, just because I tend to struggle with like figuring out the volume levels during every chapter 5 push-ups. Oh hell no! Hell no! Listen. I've been going to the gym again. And I just had an upper body day yesterday, and I've been sore all day. I hate it. I ain't doing that. Alright, let me see. And there we are. Okay. So, with that being said, let's get back into into Another by Yukito Ayatsuji. Let's see. turn this down a little bit. Okay. Chapter 2, July 1. The rest of June passed uneventfully and rolled into July. A fresh disaster befell the class as soon as the new month began was, thankfully, not a result of a changing month. So May and I continue our strange life at school basically unchanged, as two students who were not there. For my part, it went by in the midst of peace and tranquility, not as uncomfortable as I had felt at the beginning, but still holding the threat that we would never know when the peace could shatter. Mr. Chibiki, true to his word, was briefly gone from school the very next day, and I never laid eyes on him for the remainder of June. The secondary library in Building 0 stayed closed the whole time, I guess because I didn't have staff to replace him. I had a chance to learn of what wow, English. Right? Oh no, not at all. Oh, okay, I see. No need to apologize. Don't worry. See. See. Yeah, no worries. Me personally, I cannot lift 100 pounds. I can when it comes to the gym. I've noticed that I'm able to, when it comes to weight distribution, whenever I use the exercise machines, my legs, I can handle up to like 50 pounds, but my arms, I've been slowly working back up because it's been a long time since I've gone to the gym, and I'm just now starting to get back into it. I can take up to, I believe, 20 pounds. 20 pounds, but 30 if I really want to push it. But again, I'm not trying to push myself. So for now, I'm just taking 20. So, hey, I'll take what I can get. I'll take what I can get with my little noodle arms. Okay, let me see. I had a chance to learn what sort of mundane business Mr. Chibiki had left town for later on. Apparently, he had a wife and kids who lived away from him for a long time, staying in Sapporo, where his wife had been born. She had called him, so he had gone to Hokkaido. I never found out more details than that, but I can imagine. It would be the reason his family lived somewhere else because of its phenomenon that Mr. Chibiki had entrenched himself at North Yomi to observe. Maybe it wasn't because the couple didn't get along, but instead because he had sent his wife and kids to live far away out of range, so that remote as the chance might be, they wouldn't get caught up in the disasters, or something like that. Oh, of course! Give me 1 second. Okay, how is that? Is that better? Let me know if that's better, or if I need to turn that up a little bit more. Okay. And then there was a separate issue. Recently, one fact at least had become unexpectedly clear. Yeah, no problem. Happy to help out. One fact at least had become unexpectedly clear. I found out about it in the form of an announcement from May. Yesterday, one of my senpai came to the gallery. A girl named Tachibana that I knew from the art club. She graduated 2 years ago. She used to be a third-year Class 3. She likes dolls, so she comes by the gallery occasionally for a while now. But I hadn't seen her in a long time. This is the first I'd ever heard of her having a senpai like that. Ignoring my slight surprise, May went on. I guess she heard some rumors about what's going on this year, so... You mean she came to see you because she was worried? May inclined her head ambiguously at my question. More like she didn't want to get involved, but it kept bothering her, so she ended up coming by, I guess. She gave me her detached read on it. I think Mochizuki might be the source of the rumors. She acted like she knew I was the one who was not there this year, but she didn't really give me any advice or anything. In talking about stuff, she looked really jumpy, so I made the first move and brought up a couple questions I had. The first had been a question about the extra person, the casualty, who had infiltrated third-year Class 3 2 years ago. May asked Tachibana about her, mentioning the name Mami Asakura that she had gotten from Mr. Chibiki's binder. Do you remember someone with that name being in your class? The result was basically exactly as Mr. Chibiki had told us. No, I don't, she answered. Then she had added uncertainly, but after everything was over, I heard stories that there was a girl with that name. Meaning that the loss of memories involving the identity of a casualty had, in fact, happened to her, a former member of third year class 3. The other question was about the student who had been made not there in third year class 3 2 years ago. What was he like? May had asked, cutting straight to the point. The disaster started because he violated the class's decision partway through the year, right? What happened to him after that? She said it was a boy named Sakuma 2 years ago. Apparently, he was always a quiet, unobtrusive kid. As detached as always, May related the facts that she had extracted from the girl Tachibana. It was a little after the start of second semester that Sakuma abandoned his role as not there. Then the disaster started at the beginning of October, apparently. People died in November and December, and then, after New Year's, Sakuma killed himself. Oh, suicide, huh? I didn't get a chance to ask what happened after that, but he might have been the death for January in 96. It was afternoon, during a break in the perpetual rain. We had gone down the bank of the Yomiyama River and were watching the cool water flow by as we talked. We had cut afternoon classes, and without either of us making the suggestion outright, we had left the school grounds. We returned to school through the back gate, around the time 6th period would be ending. When we came back in, someone shouted at us, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Must be the gym teacher, Mr. Miyamoto. I guessed immediately. I suppose he spotted us from far away and mistaken us for regular students who cut out of school. He came running up to us. "Hold it right there. Where are you two off to at this time of—" That was as far as he got before he came to a halt and took another look at us. The words, "Wait a second," clear on his face. Then he swallowed the rest of his lecture. I gave a slight silent dip of my head, and Mr. Miyamoto kind of awkwardly turned his eyes in some other direction. With a sigh, he said, "This must be a tough one on you two. Still, I can't really condone you leaving school. You need to cut back on that." That's sweet. With all this going on, I made up my mind to ask Reiko about it again. After much tortured thought with no results, I just couldn't stay quiet any longer. That was, yes, the night of the last Saturday in June. I heard something from Mr. Chibiki, the librarian, the other day. I spoke up, unprompted, to stop Reiko as she was getting ready to withdraw in silence to the side house after dinner. Right then, I couldn't worry about my grandparents' eyes being on us. "I heard that in your last year of middle school, when you were in third year class 3, that was actually an on year." An on year? Reiko's face had until then worn a dreary, a zoned out look, but now wariness flashed across it, or so it seemed. A year when an A year when an unidentified extra person joins the class and disasters befall people, meaning that every month people linked in the class lose their lives in one way or another. That's what they call the curse of third year class 3. Of course you know that, right, Reiko? "Oh, yeah, you're right," Reiko replied, her voice husky. Then she curled her right hand into a fist and thumped herself on the head. "Right, that's what that means." It had been a long time since I had talked to Reiko like this. Naturally, I was incredibly nervous. She definitely felt the same. "I'm sorry, Koichi. Really sorry." Reiko swung her head slowly back and forth. "I'm useless." I couldn't help seeing my mother's face from the yearbook overlay itself on Reiko's ashen features. Struggling to quiet the fervent ache in the sinews of my heart, I said, "I want to ask you something about 15 years ago, when my mom had me and then died in this town. Was that one of the disasters of that year?" Without confirming or denying it, Reiko only repeated herself. I'm sorry, Koichi. I tried to talk to Reiko about what happened 15 years ago once before. That was when I learned that she, like my mother, had been in Class 3, her 3rd year. Did they say the I'm so sorry, guys. I cannot English today. Did they say the curse of Class 3 about your class or anything like that back then? Reiko had shrugged off my question by saying, that was 15 years ago. I forgot. Had she been playing dumb? Or had her memories of something that actually happened 15 years ago truly become hazy? Normally, I would say it was the former, but the latter was hardly impossible. As Mr. Chibiki had explained to us, people's repetition of memories concerning his phenomenon were, for the most part, definitely not something that could be called good. Plus, it seemed to vary between people. Well, Reiko? Still I had to ask. What do you think it was? I don't know. Now hold on, Koichi. Why are you bringing this up all of a sudden? My grandmother, who had been listening to our conversation as she cleared the table, but now she paused and her eyes widened. Grandma probably doesn't know, I thought to myself then. Even on the outside chance that she had been told something of a situation in the past, her memories of it would certainly have gotten hazy by now. It's so sad. Suddenly, my grandfather broke his long silence. His emaciated shoulders trembled as his voice caught in his throat, as if he were choking on tears. Poor Ritsuko. It's so sad. Ritsuko and Reiko both. That's enough now, Grandpa. My grandmother hurried to his side. She rubbed his back and placed him as if he were a child throwing a tantrum. You mustn't start thinking about that. There. Go over there and have a rest now, Grandpa. I felt as though I could hear the shrill voice of the minya bird Ray overlapping my grandmother's voice. Cheer! Cheer up! My grandmother took my grandfather's hand and helped him stand up. They eventually made their way out of the room, at which point... About that year, Reiko said at last. I honestly don't know what happened to Ritsuko, but I don't know. I feel like it stopped part way through that year. It stopped? Surprised, I repeated what she had said. You mean the disasters for that year? Yeah. She nodded feebly, and then thumped herself on the head again. There were almost no cases where the disasters had stopped once they had begun. This is the question I had had when Mr. Chibiki had said that. If almost none meant the same thing as we can't say it never happened, then that would mean there had to be a case where they stopped partway through, meaning... Had that rare case been the year that Reiko was in 3rd year 15 years ago? Why is that? Unable to contain my excitement, my words came out forcibly. What made the disasters stop for that year, Reiko? But her reply was evasive. It's no use. It's all fuzzy. Can't really remember. She thumped herself in the head a few more times and languidly shook her head. You know what? Something definitely happened that summer. In the end, that was all I got out of Reiko that night. I'm gonna get a quick drink of water. Give me 1 second. Let's see. There it is. Okay. Also, I just remembered I forgot to update thing. Hold on. Give me 1 second. Okay. Mukbang water drinking ASMR. Just for a quick moment. Okay, let me see. Make sure that is all good. And just There we go. Karaoke? Oh. If I could figure out a way to get around the copyright, I would definitely be down to do a karaoke stream. That would be a lot of fun. I love karaoke streams. And there we go. Okay. Okay. Alright. During what remained of June, I had 2 other opportunities to make my way to the town of Misaki, to blue eyes empty to all in the twilight of Yomi. Once, I swung by first thing after going to the municipal hospital for the prognosis of my collapsed lung. I paid the fee, looked at the dolls, and went down alone into the basement display room. But I didn't encounter May that day. I hadn't told her I was coming, so I didn't even know if she was home. I didn't venture to ask the old woman, Grandma Amane, to have May come down. I contented myself with viewing several new creations by Kritka, and left a little less than a half hour later. It feels weird coming here and not running into May, the thought went through my mind that day. The other time, and was the last day of June, the evening of Tuesday, the 30th. I wound up going because May invited me over on the way home from school. I didn't go up to their home on the 3rd floor that day, and I didn't see Kritka either. We passed the time on the sofas in the 1st floor of the gallery, still empty of customers. That was the first time I accepted that tea that Grandma Amane made for us. It was far, far tastier than the canned iced tea, at least, that's for sure. July starts tomorrow. May was the one who spoke first. I think it's fair to say those words implied something like, at last, after tomorrow, we'll get the moment of truth. I was all too aware of that myself. Right then I deliberately dodged the issue. The end of semester exams are starting next week already. Will you be okay? May pursed her lips a little petulantly. That's not really something someone who's not there needs to worry about, is it? I guess that's true, but... I wish I could see your house sometime, Sakakibara. I faltered for a snappy response to the next of her out-of-the-blue observations. You mean, wait, my house in Tokyo? No, here in Yomiyama. May shook her head slightly and narrowed her right eye coolly. The house where your mom grew up, in Furuchi. Huh? Why? Just because. A short while later, May led me down to the basement. A gloomy string melody was playing in the gallery. I thought it might even be the same music that was playing the first time I'd come here in May. The space was crypt-like and sunken in chill, as always. The dolls were set out here, there, and everywhere, with all their various parts. I didn't feel quite as captive to the sensation that I needed to breathe for all of them that day. Maybe I was getting used to it. Straight ahead, all the way in the back of the room, with a deep red curtain at its back, stood the black hexagonal coffin. We headed over to it, then May turned silently back to look at me. She stood in such a way that her body hid from my view the doll shut up in the coffin. The doll looked exactly like her. She touched her fingers to the eye patch of her left eye. I took this off for you once before down here, didn't I? Yeah. The left eye beneath her eye patch that I'd seen that day. Of course I remembered it vividly. A blue eye, empty to all. She revealed a blue eye with an artificial spark, exactly like the eyes I had sunken in the eye sockets of the dolls. Why? Now again out of nowhere. Why? Undeterred by my bewilderment, May took her eye patch off and then placed her right palm over the right half of her face, covering her right eye for once. The exposed blue eye on her left was all that looked unswervingly at me. I was 4 when I lost my eye. May's lips trembled, a pale ghost of her voice filling the room. I barely remember it. A malignant tumor formed in the eyeball that
had formed in the eyeball and I had to get it surgically removed. When I woke up one day, my left eye was gone. Unable to say anything, all I could do was stand there and watch her face closely. At first, they tried a bunch of regular artificial eyes to fill the hole, but my mother said none of them were cute enough. So she made a special eye for me, my special doll's eye. A blue eye empty to all. You don't have to hide it, you know. Without my meaning to say them, the words came out then and escaped my mouth. Even without the eye patch, I think your eye is pretty. I startled myself and got flustered saying it, and my heart started to pound almost immediately. I couldn't really read May's expression as she stood there looking at me, probably because her right hand was covering her right eye. My left eye is a doll's eye. The words May had spoken the first time I had run into her, or here, echoed again in my ears. It can see things better not seen, so I usually keep it hidden. All at once, a mysterious foreboding took hold of me. What does that even mean? At the time, I had been thrown for a total mental loop. But what about now? Things were a little different. That thought occurred to me too. She could see things better not seen. Things better not seen. I wanted to ask exactly what it was she saw, but I set those feelings aside for the moment. I had a vague premonition all the while that a day would probably come where I would have to ask her that question, and she would answer it. I found out later on that when I had my surgery on my eye, I nearly died. May's palm still covered her right eye. The truth is, what happened back then left a mark on me. Do you believe me? You mean like memories of a near-death experience? Just nightmares of a 4-year-old kid sick in bed. That's good enough if you think of them like that. Despite what she said, I noticed how serious May's tone had become. I don't think death is very gentle. People talk about easy deaths all the time, but it's not like that. It's dark. Darker and lonelier than anything else in the world. Dark and lonely. Yeah, but living is exactly the same, right? Don't you think? Maybe so. Ultimately, I'm all I have. Doesn't matter how things were when I was born. I'm talking about the life I'm living and dying every day. You know what I mean? What could I say? No matter how closely linked people appear to be, we are in fact all alone. Me, my mother, and you too, Sakakibara. Then May concluded with one last comment. And her too. Misaki was the same. Misaki? Did she mean Misaki Fujioka? That was the name of May's cousin, who had died in the municipal hospital at the end of April. The image of my first encounter with May in the elevator of the impatient ward flowed through my mind with a strange immediacy, as if it only happened yesterday. Thus, June ended, and July came upon us. Thankfully, the result was not a fresh calamity befalling the class as soon as the new month began, but I thought the level of tension permeating the air in the classroom had ramped way up, which was only natural, I suppose. 2 people linked to the class, namely Miss Mizuno and Takabayashi, had already lost their lives in June. Would there be new deaths now that a new month had begun? That would be the crucial test to define whether this unprecedented strategy of increasing the number of students not there too would be effective. And yet, the strange life I shared with May at school went on just the same, showing no change. On the surface, at least. Peace and tranquility that carried with it the threat of never knowing when it all might come crumbling down. And even so, it was all we could have wished for. Solitude, and also freedom, rested on the cold palm of that peace, reserved for the two of us alone. In the second week of July, they set the schedule for the end of semester exams. All 9 subjects over 3 days, from the 6th to the 8th. It was a regularly scheduled ritual for ranking the achievements, or lack thereof, of the students in a simple way. Boring, and also depressing. But finding it, deep down, depressing was a first for me. I suspected, and this, despite the fact that, as one of the students who was not there, I should have been openly rebelling the situation, or all set to go into it totally relaxed. Yet I wasn't. I knew the reason for it. I was remembering what happened during the midterms in May, more than I wanted to. That tragic accident that had befallen Yukari Sakuragi on the last day of exams. The terrible scene I had been unlucky enough to witness that day. The horrible memories were probably dragging me down too, to some degree or another. And this time around, she pretty much never pulled her move of handing in her answer sheet early and leaving the room. I didn't either. Is this new strategy working or not? With that thought in our minds, we couldn't help acting a little more serious than before at school. We were as careful as we could be and worked hard to erase our presence from the class. For their part, everyone else in class continued to collectively ignore us as though we were not there, even more thoroughly than before. During July, the enormity of our uneasiness became utterly incomparable with what had been in June. There we go. And the greater our uneasiness became, the harder we prayed for the month that passed us by in peace. I'm convinced that there were thoughts everyone in the class shared. However, when repeated long enough, a prayer also tends to shift, changing into a baseless ritual of the fateful. I felt uneasiness, urgency, and also frustration, swelling bigger and bigger as day after day rolled by. And even in the midst of it, maybe because I was in the midst of it, every so often, I feel unexpectedly lighthearted. This peace and tranquility. The solitude and freedom that only the two of us shared. That if I only wished for this to continue, things would keep on going exactly the same. Of course they would. Exactly the same. Yeah. For 9 more months. Right up until it's time for graduation in March next year. Just like this. Never changing. However, the reality of the world we had all been sucked into was not so indulgent as to grant that idle fantasy so easily. The end of semester exams concluded without incident, and we plowed through the calendar until there was only about a week left before the summer break. That day in the 3rd week of July. The peace in the class, which had been so narrowly preserved for a little over a month, ever since Takabayashi's death on June 6th, shattered like glass. I'm going to grab a quick drink before we jump into that. Because, we love that foreshadowing. Delicious foreshadowing. I love books that do that. Okay. There we go. Okay, now I'm happy camper. Alright. July 13th, Monday. Ever since I had become not there, I've been absent at about 9 out of 10 of the short homeroom periods in the morning. Damn. Honestly, not gonna lie, same bestie. If I were not there, I would be taking full advantage of not being there and show up to class late and sleep in. There we go. Usually, I would slip right in before the start of first period, and May did the same. But that morning, even though we hadn't arranged to, the two of us somehow happened to both be in in the classroom early. Through the course without talking to anyone or meeting anyone's eyes.
Though, of course, oh, wow, correction.
Though, of course, without talking to anyone or meeting anyone's eyes. For the first time in a while, I felt up starting one of my paperbacks, which was open in my lap. It was a collection of Stephen King short stories that I had never read. For the record, the story I was reading then was The Mangler. More than a month had passed by since my up-close experience with a graphic death, and I had gotten back a tiny bit of my capacity to separate that kind of novel from reality and enjoy it. That made me feel like a real tough guy, let me tell you. The end of the rainy season for the region had just been announced the day before. The weather was beautiful, with not a wisp of cloud in the sky even early in the morning. Fierce sunlight seemed to plead for the true advent of summer. The breeze that blew in through the open windows of the classroom was crisper than the week before, and felt much nicer. Whenever I glanced over to check on May, sitting in that same seat all the way in the back of the classroom next to the windows that faced the schoolyard, she looked like an apparition whose outline was smudged by all the lighting shining in from the outside. Just like when I had first come to the classroom in May. But no, she wasn't an apparition. She was actually physically there. Had that really been 2 months ago already? Excuse me? Slightly after the bell to begin class, the door at the front of the classroom opened and the head teacher, Mr. Kubadera, came in. He was dressed in the same boring white dress shirt as always. His posture made him seem, like always, somehow ineffectual. Just like always, I thought, watching him lazily, when a strange feeling came over me. A couple of things weren't like always. Mr. Kubadera always wore a neatly knotted necktie, but not today. For the short homeroom period, he always brought a single attendance list in with him, but today he had come in protectively clutching a black overnight bag in his arms. Oh no. Oh, I know what scene is coming up.
Trigger warning for anyone who is about to listen to this part of the audio. If I remember right from the anime, this is a scene where a explicitly performed unaliving takes place. So if that is not your cup of tea, I will make sure to leave a timestamp in the YouTube video for when the scene begins and when it ends. That way, if you are uncomfortable with these types of scenes, you can skip right past it, okay? Thank you so much. With that being said, we'll jump right into it. I'll get it over with as quick as possible, and then we'll be right back on track. Plus, his hair was always neatly parted to one side and gelled, but today it was wild and disheveled. When I looked at Mr. Kubadera, standing on the teacher's platform and facing us, with these suspicions in mind, something did indeed feel strange. His expression was vacant, somehow, as if he weren't seeing anything, even the things right in front of him. On top of that, even from my seat, I could see a delicate, intermittent movement on half of his face. Twitch, twitch, twitching, as if the muscles were spasming. Did he have a tic? Just from looking, the movement seemed to be that of a psychotic, twisted nature. I don't know how many people besides me had noticed the state of their head teacher, or whether it made him suspicious. We were all sitting at our desks, but a whisper of the previous commotion had still lingered in the classroom. Everyone. Placing both hands on the lectern, Mr. Kubadera began to speak. Good morning. His greeting, too, felt odd as soon as I heard it. His voice was strangely tense, just like his face. Miss Mikami wasn't with him. I didn't think she was out today, but she didn't show up for a single short homeroom either, so... Everyone, Mr. Kubadera said again. Today, I need to apologize to all of you. This morning, here where I stand,
I owe you all." At that, the buzzing in the room faded to silence. "I asked you all to work hard to make it to graduation in good health next March. I, too, have tried to give it my best effort. Unhappy events began occurring in May, but even so I told myself that somehow we would begin again." Even as he recited his speech, Mr. Kubadera's gaze never engaged with his students. His vacant eyes seemed to simply hover in empty space. He had set the overnight bag he had brought with him on his desk. As he went on speaking, Mr. Kubadera opened the bag and reached his right hand inside. "Whatever the future brings is your problem." Oh, alright, that was too much emotion. "Whatever the future brings is your problem." The same tone as if he were reading an example sentence from a textbook. In itself, that wasn't very different from usual, and yet, it is impossible to stop once it's begun, no matter what lengths we go to. Or is there a way to put an end to it? I don't know. How am I supposed to know? And actually, what do I care? I mean, as the head teacher of this class, I am, after all, obligated to work with you all to overcome these trials without ever bending, to reach graduation until March unharmed. Even at this late date, A tone not so different from usual. At that point, it began to get more unsettling and his voice became hard to make out. But the very moment I had the thought, an abrupt change went through him. All of a sudden, the words coming out of Mr. Kubadera's mouth broke down. They shattered. That's the only way to express it. And I don't know what. When I try to transcribe it, it comes out looking like a comic book. But all of a sudden, he started making these strange sounds that didn't seem as though they should have come from a healthy human being. All while everyone watched, stupefied, not even trying to decode whatever meaning was in the sounds. Mr. Kubadera slowly withdrew his right hand from the bag that rested on top of the desk. He was gripping an object that was pretty alien to the middle school classroom. Something with a sharp silver blade. A hunting knife or a kitchen knife. Something like that. Even from my seat, I could see it clearly. Still, we were all struggling to understand what was happening. What was he doing? Making those weird noises and pulling out a knife like that? But a mere 2 or 3 seconds later, everyone in the class found out the answer to that, like it or not. Mr. Kubadera thrust his right hand out in front of himself. His fingers curled tightly around the handle of the knife. He bent his elbow inward, turning the bladed end on himself. The strange noises that never formed into words still rushed from his mouth. And then, as tumult began to rise in front of everyone, Mr. Kubadera produced an incredibly violent, unearthly sound and shoved the knife into his own neck. The weird noise fluctuated into a bellow. The commotion transformed into a flock of screams. A deep, perfectly straight line had been sliced open across the front of his throat, and fresh as red blood was spraying out. For an instant, the horrendous fountain of blood almost seemed like a bad joke. The students in the seats closest to the platform wound up being covered in the spray. Some knocked their chairs over and ran for it, while others seemed frozen, unable to move. Mr. Kubadera must have sliced open his windpipe along with his artery, because his yell quickly lost the form of a voice and mutated into a thick whistling noise. The hand that had gripped the knife, his shirt, his face, they were all stained bright red with his own blood. Even at that state, Mr. Kubadera stayed on his feet, his left hand on the desk to prop himself up, and the bloodied mask of his face, his wide, vacant eyes. A certain spark came into them suddenly, and I felt them glare in my direction. Hatred. Yes. It was like hatred. But it only lasted a moment. Mr. Kubadera raised his right hand once more and placed the blood-splattered knife against his neck, cutting even deeper. Bright red blood sprayed out without end. The flesh in the jugular area of his neck was pretty much severed, and his head flopped backwards. The gaping wound in his neck looked like the wide-open mouth of some inexplicable creature. Still, the knife in Mr. Kubadera's right hand never fell, even as his body shuddered, and then finally, he fell. He started to roll off the teacher's platform, and then he stopped moving. The room had fallen pristinely silent as this grotesque spectacle all concluded. 1 second later, and the balance had tipped. A muddle of voices began to fill the room in a cresting flood. At that moment, I rose up from my seat abstractedly and walked forward to the spot where I could get a good look at Mr. Kubadera's collapsed body. Tomihiko Kazumi was at a desk in the very front row, shaking so badly I could practically hear his seat rattling. There was a spray of blood across the lenses of his glasses, but he neither moved to wipe it away nor to leave his desk. Beside him, a girl had at least managed to move from her seat, but she had sunk immediately to the floor. There was another girl curled over her desk, clutching her head in her hands, who was making a loud, unending shriek, and a boy on all fours making strangled, gagging noises. And then, the door on my right at the front of the classroom banged open and someone ran in. Why is he here? I couldn't restrain my surprise. Dressed in all black and his hair in a straw like as ever, it was the librarian, Mr. Chibiki.
All of you, out of the room.
Mr. Chibiki must have decided it was too late to mount a rescue as soon as he saw Mr. Kubadera's bloody, crumpled form. He never moved towards the fallen man.
Just get out of here, quickly now.
He ordered the students in a loud voice. Then, turning back to the door he had just come through, he called out, "Miss Mikami." I saw her standing out in the hallway, peering in with a terrified expression.
"Miss Mikami, I need you to call the police and an ambulance immediately. Please."
Right.
Is anyone hurt?
Mr. Chibiki turned to address the students fleeing the room.
It seems not. I want anyone who feels ill or is starting to feel worse to speak up. Don't try to hide it. We'll get you to the nurse's office right away.
Next, his gaze locked onto me.
Sakakibara, are you?
I'm fine. I clenched my stomach tightly and nodded at him. Really, I'm fine.
Let's get out of here, Sakakibara.
A voice came out of nowhere from behind my back. May, I realized immediately. I turned around and saw her face was paler than usual. Of course such a random event would upset her too. Of course it would. But still. The body of Mr. Kubadera laid and collapsed on the floor, no longer even twitching. As she looked down at him, something about her gaze was reminiscent of the way she looked at the Legion of Dolls at the Twilight of Yomi. I guess it didn't work, May spoke in a whisper. Even when they upped the number of people not there, it didn't help after all.
I don't know. You two need to leave too. Go on.
Mr. Chibiki shepherded us out of the classroom, where our eyes met those of several students who had gone out into the hall ahead of us. Izumi Akazawa, the girl who had become class representative after Yukari Sakuragi's death, was there, with their entourage around her. Their faces were whiter than white, and yet, once they glared harshly at me and May, they never said anything, but, "This is your fault." I felt as if they might hurl the accusation at us any minute. Okay, let me look ahead and... Okay, so, that is the end of that section of the book, luckily, so, if you skip to this point, this is the point where the unaliving scene has ended, and now we are back into the regular story. So, for context, if you've skipped a scene, the headroom teacher, Mr. Kubadera, unalived himself in front of the classroom. So, that is the synopsis for what happened in this scene, and I will leave it at that for those who skipped, as to be considerate to you. So, with that being said, we'll jump back into the book. Okay. They said Mr. Kubadera's behavior had been suspicious all that morning. He had been close-lipped the entire time he was in the teacher's office and hadn't offered the slightest reaction to anyone's greetings. They said he looked deeply distracted by something. They looked like a zombie. Apparently, Mr. Chibiki had run into Mr. Kubadera on the street on their way to school. On their way to school. The two engaged in the briefest of conversations, and Mr. Chibiki said that Mr. Kubadera's behavior at the time was very strange. Dangerous, even. Let's see. He had offered a refrain of, "I'm so tired and I'm so worn out," in a genuinely pained voice, and it feebly appealed to Mr. Chibiki that, "I don't know what to do." He had also apparently told Mr. Chibiki, "You understand, at least." Mr. Kubadera had known that Mr. Chibiki was once a social studies teacher at North Yomi, and was also once in charge of third year class 3. And then when they parted ways, Mr. Kubadera had said something to Mr. Chibiki in a voice that was barely audible. "I need your help when this is over." Of course, that had nagged at Mr. Chibiki. How could it not? That was how Mr. Chibiki described it later. That's why he'd come to the 3rd floor of Building C during the short homeroom, to see how things were going. And when he had gotten there, he heard the screams and weeping of students in Class 3. By the time the police and the ambulance crew arrived, Mr. Kubadera had long since passed. They discovered that the knife he had used was a carving knife he had brought from home. Apparently, when the police went to search his home, they found something terrible. This, too, was information that Mr. Chibiki shared with us later on. He said he had gotten lots of information about the police. English. He said he had gotten lots of information out of the police officer who had come to question him. Mr. Kubadera was single and had been living with his mother. She was quite elderly, and some years ago she had suffered a stroke. She'd been largely bedridden since then. Mr. Kubadera wasn't the sort of person who discussed private details of his life, so very few of his colleagues knew of his family situation. But his mother, when the police went to his home, they said she had passed away in the bed where she had spent her days. Not only that, suffocated by a pillow pressed over her face, an obvious murder. That's what they found. She had died late at night on Sunday the 12th, or before dawn on Monday the 13th. They were saying that the odds were stacked towards Mr. Kubadera being the person who had held the pillow over her face and killed her. It must have been caretaker's exhaustion, as they said. He was driven into a mental state that was beyond his capacity to escape, and he wound up murdering his elderly mother. But there were so many options he could have chosen to pursue after that. He could have turned himself in, or he could have tried to hide what he had done. Or he might have thrown his life away and fled. But in the end, he chose to wait for morning to come, then went to school and deliberately killed himself in front of you all. What do you make of his choice? Can you simply write it off as the act of a madman? So you're saying this is another incident that was part of the phenomenon. When the words came out of me just then, they sounded completely natural. Now Mr. Kubadera was, I don't know. Normally he would have done it without stirring things up so much, so he was dragged into dying like that? I think that interpretation is correct. It's the correct one in this case. Though, of course, I have no way to prove it. Mr. Chibiki said with frustration, scratching fiercely at his long, disheveled hair. Still, considering all the circumstances at play, it's quite lucky that none of the students in the classroom were hurt during the episode. We were in the secondary library. It was after school on Tuesday, the day after the incident. May was with me, but right now she was basically a stone, and said pretty much nothing. Either way, this means it didn't work. I lowered my voice to spit out the words that had come too late. Mr. Kubadera and his mother. Since she was a family member in range, The two of them wound up being the deaths of July, didn't they? Yes. So in the end, this new strategy of having two people be not there was a bust. Didn't change anything. So a disaster at started really won't stop. We really can't stop it? Unfortunately, it seems not. With a dismal feeling, my gaze fled from the dim room to the world outside the windows. I caught glimpses of the blue sky entering in the wake of the rainy season, the color almost disgustingly free of gloom. The disasters for this year hadn't stopped. The torrent of blood spewing from Mr. Kubadera's neck, the color of it even now painted the sky a rich red color. The ghoulish image bubbled up out of nowhere as I closed my eyes tightly, reflectively. The disasters hadn't stopped. People were going to keep dying. Gotta get a quick drink during this little page break. There we go. Playing around with it a little bit. Okay. There we go. Chapter 12. July.
Honestly, I love that. I love how, like, my mom spazzes out and, like, makes a little happy face whenever I go to drink anything. So silly.
There we go. There we go. Chapter 12. July 2. I started to have a lot of bad dreams. I don't remember the details very clearly, so I don't know if it was exactly the same dream every time. But they all had a lot of the same people in them. Either Mr. Kubadera, who had just died, or Yukari Sakuragi, who had died in May after falling down the stairs, or Miss Mizuno, who had died in an elevator accident at the hospital in June. A couple of my classmates who were still alive would show up too, like Izumi Akazawa or Tomohiko Kazumi. Mr. Kubadera would glare at me, his face splattered with blood, and both eyes flashing with an intense hatred, and then he would start to speak. He would proclaim, "It's your fault." Sakuragi would rise unsteadily to her feet and yank out the umbrella stabbed so deeply into her throat. Then she would turn to me and declare, "This is your fault." Miss Mizuno did the same thing. The doors to the elevator in the inpatient ward slid open, allowing her to drag herself out. "You did this, you know. It's your fault, both of you. It's your fault, both of you." This was the merciless condemnation launched from Akazawa's lips. Following close on its heels, the same words came from the mouths of Kazumi, Teshigawara, and Mochizuki. "Stop. Please stop." I tried to shout, but no sound came out of me. I couldn't speak. "You're wrong. This isn't my fault. I wanted to deny it, but I just... They're right. Somewhere inside myself, I agreed with them. That must be why I can't say anything. Because of me. Because I came to the school. Because I had interacted with May, the girl who was not there. I violated the decision that was meant to be a talisman to prevent the disasters. It didn't matter how inevitable my actions had been. That's why, because of me, the disasters for this year had acted on them. Because of me, they had met such senseless ends." I would groan in my sleep until it got so hard to breathe that I woke up in the middle of the night. It happened several times a night. I would kick off the blankets that had grown sticky with sweat, then take several deep breaths, alone in the pitch darkness. If my lung collapsed again, this time there would be no going back for sure. That thought struck deep.
Well, what you gonna do? Nothing you could have done about it. Don't get so down, Sakaki. You can't blame yourself and drag yourself down on the dumps all you want, but it's not gonna change anything.
After Mr. Kubadera's suicide, the first person to start talking to me was, who else? Teshigawara. He had gone gung-ho, back to being the bleached airhead, in line with the image I had had of him from the very beginning when I transferred in. He was casually striking up conversations with me about everything under the sun, despite how completely he had been ignoring me until just a few days ago. When I expressed some understandable sarcasm on that point, he replied, "That hurt me too, dude. All of a sudden, we had to start snubbing you? I couldn't tell you what was going on. How terrible is that?" Teshigawara gave a bubbling laugh, but his face turned instantly serious. "You know the situation now, right?" he checked, just to be sure. "Apparently. You said that Chibiki guy in the secondary library told you most of the details, right? Then you get it, don't you, Sakaki?" "Yeah, I totally get it." I turned my eyes from his face and repeated in a low voice, "I get it." Then, "I don't think you had a choice. I mean, what else could you have got Ace done? Could you guys have done? I get it." Since the attempt at increasing the number of kids not there to 2 hadn't had any effect, there was no need for everyone to keep going. There was nothing to be gained by continuing to ignore May and me, so... It wasn't just me. There was a transformation in the way everyone in class behaved towards May, too. Demarce by Mr. Kubadera's death. Not as if they had discussed the issue and decided to do it. I thought it probably a more gradual and visible change. For example, when this happened, when I was talking to Teshigawara during lunch on Thursday, May was at my side, and Teshigawara acted as if she really existed, and even addressed 1 or 2 comments to her himself. Hold on. My nose itched for a second, I'm sorry. Teshigawara wasn't the only one. In a reversal of the way everyone had acted until last week, they had stopped treating May as if she were not there. However, May's personality was not exactly what you would call social, so it was nothing more than a subtle change. One you wouldn't even notice unless you were deliberately looking for it. But still, the news would get around soon, and teachers would probably start calling her name in class and calling on her for answers. Mai Misaki, being treated by all those around her as someone there. Of course, this is the way things should have been all along, but I actually found it oddly unsettling that people acted this way. The third-year Class 3 classroom on the 3rd floor of Building C had been put off limits immediately as the scene of a violent death. The class wound up being hastily moved to an empty room in Building B. The ancient desk and chair May have been using were left in Building C. And as a solution for the absence of a head teacher, the assistant teacher, Miss Mikami, would obviously take the position of substitute head teacher for the time being, except... In the room we had switched to in Building B, the empty seats were strikingly obvious. Maybe that was to be expected. More than half of the class had gone home early the day of the incident. Totally understandable. And the day after, and the day after that, the number of students who used Mr. Kubadera's death as a reason to stay home from school had risen quite high. I mean, sure, I guess. That was Teshigawara's comment on the situation. No one's gonna see something horrible like that and not be affected. I guess anyone with normal nerves probably wouldn't want to come back for a while. If we were still in that room, I'd be gone too, no question. Kazumi's been out this whole time. That guy's even wimpier than anyone else I know, ever since he was a kid. Plus, he was in the very front seat. I'm shocked he didn't pass out, actually. Teshigawara spoke bluntly. But at root, it really was affection for his childhood friend that he'd be better off without. With the next breath, he added, I tried calling him last night, but he actually sounded happy. Couldn't believe it. He said he'll be here tomorrow. I wonder if some people just aren't going to be coming back until after summer break. It's only a couple more days after all. Without a second of hesitation, Teshigawara replied, "No way they're coming back." I'm actually going to take a quick break to use the restroom, so I will be right back, guys. Give me one moment. I'll be back in, say 3 minutes. I'll be right back. And we're back. Alright, we are back. May have been listening to our conversation in silence, but at that she murmured, "Some people may have left town by now." Left town? Teshigawara's face looked kind of shocked, and May gave a slight nod. "Yep. I hear there are plenty of people who did it every year. They get out of Yomiyama for summer break." Because the danger doesn't reach outside Yomiyama, you mean? I wonder if that's true. According to Mr. Chibiki, there's a pretty good possibility for that. Anyway. So then what? The kids who booked it told their families what's going on? Maybe so, but there's that taboo against talking about this stuff, even with your family, so it's a tough problem. The bridge of Teshigawara's nose filled with wrinkles. Then he spat. "I don't even know." Then he turned to look at May again and said, "Anyway, you really are a weird one, Misaki. You're wrapped up in this too, but you act all cool about it. Like it's someone else's problem." "Do I?" "It almost makes me think you're..." Teshigawara trailed off for a few beats there, but in the end, he went on in a tone of indifference that sounded pretty deliberate. "Maybe underneath it all, you're the extra person for this year." "Me?" A shadow of a smile went through her right eye, the one unobscured by her eye patch. "I don't think I am, anyway."
Figured.
"Yeah. But you know, they say the extra person hiding in class doesn't even know they're the casualty, so maybe..." May was joking about it now, but when the same topic had come up about our house before, I remembered her flatly telling me something different. "I know that I'm not the casualty." Why was that? How had she been able to say that with such assurance? The question bugged me. "But it could, in fact, be you, Teshigawara," May said with another faint smile. "What do you think?"
Me? Teshigawara reeled, his eyes wide, and he pointed at the tip of his nose. "No way, come on, quit joking around."
"Are you sure there's no way?"
"Hey, I'm alive. I've got a pretty incredibly healthy appetite for food and for worldly possessions, and I don't have a clue what I could have ever died from. I'm not trying to brag, but I got super vivid memories my whole life, ever since I was a kid." Watching Teshigawara's frantic response, I couldn't help letting out a burst of laughter, and yet... that didn't mean I was denying the possibility that he could, in fact, be the extra person for that year. Inside, I was working hard to think it over calmly. Who is the casualty? Conscious all the time that the question written on May's desk was even more crucial now. That's a strange sentence. Anyways. Let me see something. Okay. There is an interlude, so I'm thinking... oh, there's an interlude and... let me see. Okay. Okay, so I'm thinking we will get this interlude coming up and one more chapter done, and then we will wrap up for the night. Or, actually, let me see.
Yeah, because now that I'm looking at it, yeah, that would be a good stopping point. That way, we can leave us in suspense for one final reading of this book next week. Because we are very close to the end. We're close to the very big climax. So I'm thinking after this interlude and one more chapter, we will set this up for next week's reading. Of course, Mr. Kubadera's sudden death became a topic of conversation at my grandparents' house in Koichi. Ever since May, my grandmother seemed to always respond to the continuing deaths of people linked to third year class 3 by uttering, "How frightening," in an effusive loop. When I gave her a quick background on Mr. Kubadera's suicide, she had switched to a loop of, "How terribly sad." As usual, I didn't know how much of a discussion my grandfather had really understood. Only that whenever he heard the words death or died, he reacted acutely every time. Then he would say, like he had before, "I don't want to go to any more funerals." Or he would suddenly tear up and start weeping quietly. That was how it went. As for Reiko, she was considerate enough to say, "It must have been such a shock for all of you." But she was consistently tight-lipped about the incident. I suppose that was to be expected, really. I had gotten the message on that. But you can't remember anything from 15 years ago? I couldn't keep myself from asking that question yet again. Oh, excuse me. After all, that year you were a third year in middle school. You said that the disasters had started, and then they stopped part way through the year. Why? What stopped them? Do you remember? No matter how often I asked, however, Reiko would only hang her head morosely. You said something happened during summer break. So what was it? That's a good question. Reiko propped a hand under her one cheek and sank into thought. Then, finally, her expression touched by insecurity, she murmured, as if to herself, "That summer, Ritsuko died. But that means staying shut up in the house would have been worse. Right, so I went to camp in Yomiyama." A camp? This is the first I'd heard of it. Unconsciously, I leaned forward. You guys had that? Camping over summer break? Like a school trip to the mountains? It wasn't as full-blown as that. It was just our class, I think. What's the camp on Yomiyama? Reiko struggled for an answer. My grandmother had been off to one side listening to our conversation. Just then she spoke up. "She means Mount Yomi, I'm sure." "What?" "Yomiyama was originally the name of a mountain. The mountains came first, and then the town. So the town took its name from the mountain." That reminded me. There was a mountain to the north of town actually called Yomiyama. I remembered hearing about that from Reiko herself. Right. That time she'd come and visit me while I was hospitalized back in April. Do the people here call it that? Mount Yomi? That's right. My grandmother nodded triumphantly. When we were young, your grandpa and I would hike the mountains all the time. You can see the entire town from the summit, which is quite a lovely view. Wow. I turned my eyes back to Reiko. So you had your camp during summer break in the mountains of Yomiyama. A class trip just for third year class 3? Yeah. Her face hadn't lost its unease. Haltingly, she replied, "At the foot of the mountain, there's this tiny building. The original owner used to go to North Yomi, but he donated it to the school a long time ago. So he used it sometimes for camping trips or whatever. When we went, the head teacher recruited people to go and..." "What happened then?" I asked, piling on. "Did something happen at the camp?" "I think so, maybe." Reiko dropped her head from her cheek and gave a slow shake of her head. "I just can't remember. I'm pretty sure that something happened. But then to actually tell you what that was..." "Oh. What a cop-out, right? I'm sorry." Reiko let out a tortured sigh. "No, it's okay," I murmured, unable to say aloud the words, "Please don't apologize." I had all kinds of complex feelings about it, but when I saw Reiko suffering, my heart started to hurt. Plus, after all, it had been 15 years ago. Not to mention being an event linked to the disasters, since she was directly affected by it. Maybe it was inevitable that her memory had gotten so incredibly blurry. It seemed pointless to keep questioning her for now. Although, slight as it was, I felt as though I had gotten my hands on a clue. I would just try asking Mr. Chibiki about it, and maybe get his opinion on it. With this plan in mind, I told Reiko, "It's fine, don't worry," and pasted out a clumsy smile for her. "Please don't push yourself too hard, Reiko. It's fine." Gonna get a quick drink of water. Okay. It seemed pointless to keep questioning her for now, although, slight as it was, I felt as though I had gotten my hands on a clue. Oh, I read that bit. The morning of Friday the 17th. The nightmares had stopped tormenting me the night before. It could have been Teshigawara's assurances, which had come down in a wisecracking tone, or I could have been more relaxed, so I guess I owed him thanks, as things stood right now. Sakakibara, wasn't it? Someone called to me when I was coming in school that morning, just as I came into the sight of the front gate. It was an unfamiliar man's voice from up ahead. Caught by surprise, I looked up and found a middle-aged man I had seen before coming towards me. A kind smile came over his face, and he raised one hand in a friendly gesture. You're... I searched my memory hastily and recalled his name. Oh, Mr. Oba, right? From the Yomiyama Police Department? I'm flattered that you remember me. After Mrs. Mizuno's accident, 2 detectives have questioned me in the teacher's office. He was the older of the 2, with a plump, round face. Can I help you? Oh, no. I just spotted a familiar face and thought, you know. Are you here about the thing that happened to Mr. Kubadera on Monday? Are you investigating it too? I asked that question flat out. Goodness. The smile disappeared from the detective's round face, and he nodded. Well, yes. You witnessed the incident in the classroom that morning, correct? Yeah. It must have been a shock for your teacher so suddenly. Yeah, it was. We're treating the incident as a suicide. The circumstances don't allow much room for suspicion. The issue remains the motive for his suicide. I've heard rumors how Mr. Kubadera's mother was bedridden and he... It's gone now already, hasn't it? The detective's lips bent in a rueful arc. But who knows what thoughts were behind it, because he then told me the following story, in the same overly soothing tone as the last time we met. After killing his mother, it appears your teacher spent the time and before heading into school sharpening the knife he used to kill himself. Quite vigorously at that. Signs of the activity were left in his kitchen. It paints a scene much stranger than we had ever imagined. No matter who we speak, and who we ask, we're told that Mr. Kubadera was an extremely serious, placid man, and that he pursued those acts out of the blue. It's really odd. Definitely. What was this detective trying to accomplish by latching onto me in a place like this? What did he want me to tell him? Just then, the accidental death of Miss Sanai Mizuno last month. Out of nowhere, he spoke her name. The accidental death of Miss Yukari Sakuragi the month before, and her mother's death in a car accident the same day. Yes? I've looked into all of them, and there's no possible explanation except that they were all purely accidental. Since there's no business of signs of foul play, we have no business sniffing around. Oh. And yet, how should I put it? These cases continue to nag at me. I've heard that there was another boy who died last month, although that was from an illness. A student named Takabayashi. It's a fact that quite a few people linked to the same middle school class have lost their lives in a very short period of time. Trying to ignore it is a waste of effort. Don't you agree? As the detective spoke, his eyes were fixed searchingly on my face, but all I could do was murmur, and crane my neck to one side. I can't shake it from my mind, so I've been making the rounds and asking people about it, the detective went on, purely out of personal interest. I stayed silent, my head stayed tilted to the side. Goodness. I can't shake it from my mind. And in the process, here and there, I picked up on a particular rumor. They call it the curse of third year class 3. I didn't say a word. You've heard of it, haven't you, Sakakibara? The third year class 3 of Yomiyama North Middle is cursed, and there are cursed years that roll around on an irregular schedule. In those years, someone linked to the class will die every month. This is one of the cursed years, they say. I thought it was ridiculous, but I looked into it a little. All the same. When I did, I found that there have been years in the past where quite a lot of students and people with connections to the school really do die. I don't really know anything about that. I shook my head firmly, filling the gesture with the note of denial. I wonder how very unnatural a reaction it seemed, however, in the detective's eyes. No, obviously it's not enough for me to be able to do anything at this time. If I tried to tell the detectives or my boss about this, they'd just laugh me out of the department. At that, the gentle smile returned to the detective's round face. Even if we assume that this talk about a curse is true, there's nothing we can do about it. That's the reality. I just have an individual interest. I'd like to determine what's true and what's not if I can. I couldn't say why, but I felt as if I understood what was in the man's heart, and being me, I couldn't help giving him my candid opinion. Still, detective, I really don't think you should get involved in this. It probably won't help anything to have the police around. If you're not careful, you could be putting yourself in danger too. Someone else gave me the same warning. The smile on his face shifted to a rueful smirk. I suppose you're right. Hardly seems likely. Then again. Trailing off, the detective rummaged in his pockets. He pulled out a battered business card and handed it to me. I may be a useless police officer, but if you ever think I might be able to help, don't hesitate to get in touch. I'd appreciate it if you could call my cell phone. The number's on the back of the card. Okay. Fact is, I have a daughter in her 4th year of elementary school. The detective added this last of all. If she goes into public school, like she's supposed to, then she might wind up in North Yomi. And given that, well, this issue has been nagging at me. I asked myself, what if my daughter is in 3rd year class 3 someday? Yeah. Even as I nodded, I added, she'll be okay. A completely irresponsible thing to say. I'm sure the curse will be broken by then. I'm sure. That day after classes, May and I went to the secondary library together. Naturally, we were going to see Mr. Chibiki. Teshigawara and Kazumi, back in school starting that day, seemed to want to come with us, but thankfully they decided to hold off. I wanted to avoid too many people coming and having the conversation go all over the place.
Why, hello. How have you two been?
The tone and smile Mr. Chibiki greeted us with seemed totally artificial. My mind locked up over how to respond, thinking, I haven't exactly been great. But at my side, May replied demurely, We're doing fine, thank you. Avoiding bizarre accidents and sudden illnesses.
Now that there's been a death for July, it seems the not their game has come to an end as well.
Yes. Although I kind of feel as if that's actually thrown everything off balance somehow.
I would call it at the overall cohesiveness rather than balance, but I suppose you're right. Everyone is going to be at a complete loss for how to behave going forward after all. At this point, Mr. Chibiki's face became serious, and returning to his usual tone, stripped of all excess emotion, he said, Actually, Miss Mikami came in today. Sorry, just reaching over to grab something.
She did?
I reacted instantly. Is that surprising?
No.
She knows my history here too, so she wanted to have a serious discussion with me.
A discussion?
Like what she should do now, choose a substitute head teacher for class 3? Something like that, Mr. Chibiki replied ambiguously. Then without pausing, he turned the question back on us. What about you two? Did you have something you wanted to discuss with me?
Yeah. I nodded soberly. There was something I wanted to check, and something I wanted to ask.
Oh?
The truth is, that I told Mr. Chibiki the story. About the year when the disasters began, and then stopped partway through. How it happened in 1983, 15 years ago when Reiko was in 3rd year class 3, and how apparently something had happened during a class camping trip over the summer break that year. I'd already told May about it.
83. Yes, I believe that was indeed the year. Pushing the bridge of his glasses up his nose, Mr. Chibiki slowly closed his eyes and then opened them again. The single year in these last 25 when it stopped partway through.
He then pulled the binder with the black cover out from the drawer, or on the side of the counter. It was the binder from the previous 3rd year class 3 enrollment lists.
First of all, let's take a look at this.
He held it out to us. It was already open into the page for 1983. Like all the others, X's had been written in red pen next to several of the names that run down the page. These were the students who had died. Notes on the date and how they had died were in the space to the right. I saw a couple of cases where the students themselves had been fine, but a member of their family had died. But there was no mention of the death of Reiko's older sister, Ritsuko.
There were 7 victims that year, not including Ritsuko, whom I never found out about.
Mr. Chibiki added this explanation as he peered across the counter at the file.
2 in April, 1 in May, 1 in June, 1 in July, and 2 in August. You said Ritsuko died in July, I believe. So then there were 2 in July and 8 total. As you can see, there were no more deaths as after that, starting in September, meaning
it stopped in August.
Correct. Take a look at the day of death for the deaths of August.
I did as I was told, and what I discovered was both of the people who died in August were students in class 3. Moreover, 2 of them had died on the exact same day, August 9th. The way they had died was also the name accident. Was also the same, accident. 2 students died the same day in an accident. The link was easy to me. Was this on the camping trip over summer break? Mr. Chibiki nodded without a word, so I went on. Some sort of accident happened on that trip, and 2 of them died. But during the same trip, something happened that made the disasters for that year stop.
If you look at the space at the bottom of the page, the name of the casualty isn't written there, is it?
Mr. Chibiki said, directing my attention. I looked and saw that indeed there was nothing written there.
I wasn't able to confirm who the extra person, or in other words, the casualty, was that year, since the disaster stopped partway through. I wonder if perhaps the extra person disappeared without waiting for graduation, and maybe the traces of his or her presence that year had also disappeared at the same time. There was no precedent for the situation, so I didn't know what was going on either. By the time I sensed that what may have happened and did my research, the memories of those involved had already faded, and there was no one left who remembered the name of the extra person.
I pressed my hand to my forehead and mulled over this information, while beside me, May asked, "But in any case, is it true that the disasters for that year ended in August?"
That's right.
The major question is why, and how did they stop?
Right.
You're saying you don't really understand the why?
Not clearly, no. All I know is the level of rumor and conjecture.
Rumor and conjecture? I asked. Meaning what? Can I get a quick drink? Because I'm kind of tripping over my words a little bit.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. Okay. Mr. Chibiki creased his brow in a pained look as he ran his palm through his coarse hair. Just as you said a few moments ago, Sakakibara, the camping trip took place at the overnight facility belonging to the school at the foot of Yomiyama. Is that facility still there? It's been maintained. The building is called the Sakatani Memorial Hall, and it's still used from time to time for club camping trips and that sort of thing, though I'm sure it must be quite dilapidated by now. Incidentally, there's an old shrine partway up the slope of Yomiyama. A shrine? It's also named after the mountain. Yomiyama Shrine. Yomiyama Shrine, I murmured, looking over at May. She nodded without a moment's thought. I could see how she directly knew of the place's existence. During the camping trip, everyone went to visit that shrine, they say. Apparently it was the head teacher's idea. When you say they visited the shrine, I tilted my head to one side, you don't mean there was some kind of divine intervention, do you? Some people make that claim, actually. Mr. Chibiki's tone was cold. Yomiyama was also the last name of that boy, Misaki, who died 26 years ago, after all. Not to mention that people had long suggested that the mountain's name could have come from Yomi, the name for the land of the dead. Yomiyama as the mountain of Yomi. There are even oral traditions that claim the shrine built there is, how shall I say, a linchpin in separating this world from the next. That must have inspired the head teacher at the time to make the suggestion. And that's why a disaster stopped? That's what some people say. Didn't I say that? But then, wouldn't that mean all someone would have to do in an odd year is visit the shrine? Indeed. Naturally, there appear to be some people who had the same thought in subsequent years. Mr. Chibiki informed us, his voice still cold. It seems, however, that it had no effect. So then, that's why I say it's at a lever of rumor or conjecture. In the end, I don't completely know how or why they did it. So you're saying the visit to the shrine didn't change anything? No. You can't draw such a conclusion so easily. Meaning what? Visiting the shrine may be a condition, or for example, it's also plausible that visiting the shrine had an effect, because more than a certain number of people went in the first part of August before the Alban festival. I guess that's true. I'm actually curious about that. What is an Alban festival? That seems like something specific to Japanese culture that I do not know, that I am interested to know. What is that? Oh! It's a holiday festival. Oh! Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, so evidently the Alban Festival is an annual Japanese holiday that commemorates and remembers deceased ancestors. So that's kind of the Japanese equivalent of Didamoto. What? I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, feel free to bash me. I feel bad. Ah! That's glass. Hold on. Sorry about that. Anyways, sorry, it's just a little fascinating thing I decided to look up and I found interesting that I wanted to share with y'all. Okay. Before the Alban Festival. I guess that's true. Though, of course, we can't deny the possibility that it was something else. Mr. Chibiki fixed his gaze on my face, then shot a glance in May's direction before continuing. When Miss Mikami came by today,
This is actually what we talked about. Why and how disasters stopped 15 years ago. We went over much of the same ground as we had just done. And she seemed to think of several things on her own. She was nodding and tilting her head all the time, and at the end she kept saying, "I see," and "so that's what it was," and it sounded like she was talking to herself. Mr. Chibiki cut himself off for a moment and then went on. Given how she was acting, there may be a similar camping trip this August. Then he fixed his eyes on my face again. She had some bitter experiences 2 years ago as well. Considering she has been appointed the substitute head teacher after Mr. Kubadera's death, she must be desperate for a solution. I could offer no response. I heard a quiet sigh from May, mussing his hair, or one more time, Mr. Chibiki said, "Assuming that's what happens, the question then is, how many students will participate?" I have an announcement for everyone. I know it's short notice, but I have arranged a class camping trip next month, from the 8th to be the 10th, for 2 nights and 3 days. It will be at Yomiyama's Tuesday the following week, on July 21st. It had been as hot as a steam bath in a gym, where the assembly to close the first semester had been held. After we returned to the classroom during the final homeroom before summer break, just as Mr. Chibiki had predicted, these were words that had come from the mouth of our substitute head teacher, Miss Mikami. At this hour on this day, there weren't even 20 students in the room. Some people had been out of school ever since Mr. Kubadera's death, while others had come back once, only to leave again. Of these, some might have gotten their families' understanding or cooperation and beat feet out of town, as May had suggested. There was a low-pitched murmur in the classroom at the sudden announcement of the camping trip. The turmoil in the buzzing exchange of the students' voices could clearly be heard. Why did she want to do this over summer break? From their perspective, not knowing the reasons behind it, I suppose it was a natural reaction. I'd like you to think of this as a very important ritual, Miss Mikami said, not even attempting to quiet the commotion. This is a very important ritual. It's not mandatory, but I would appreciate the participation of those students who are able to come. Are there any questions? She didn't broach any further details. A class camping trip to the same location and on the same days as the trip taken by third-year Class 3 15 years ago. If we all visited the shrine in Yomiyama during the trip, maybe the disasters for this year would stop. She had decided to have the camping trip, and yet maybe she was hesitant to make the announcement quite like that, here in the classroom. Standing atop the teacher's platform, Miss Mikami's expression seemed incredibly tense. Maybe she was nervous. From another perspective, her gaze seemed utterly vacant somehow, too. I tried hard to guess how she truly felt, despite my own agitation, but I'll send you all a handout with the details in the next few days. A permission slip will be included, so please return your slips to me by the end of the month if you'd like to participate. Any questions? That wound up being the sum of the explanation we got about the camping trip. A couple of hands went up to ask questions, but the way she handled them, they were as good as ignored. In any case, this was how we went into our summer break. The summer break that would be our last in middle school, and ripe with the possibility that it might be the last of our lives. In that case, I am probably going to let me see. Yeah, this chapter coming up is very, very thick. So, I'm probably going to end it at this next interlude, and then we will wrap up the book next week in our final reading of Another by Yukito Ayatsuji. That way we can rip off that band-aid and, get all of the action. Alright, let me see. Interlude 3. Did you get the handout for the camping trip? Yeah, it came today. What are you gonna do? Are you going?
Are you kidding? No way. But Miss Mikami told us it's a very important ritual. Come on, it's not like it's a crash course for test prep or something, you know? On the handout it says goal to strengthen the bonds of the class. What does that even mean? Why are they pulling something like this over summer break in an on year? Some people already left because staying in Yomiyama is too dangerous. If we got into some kind of accident because we were on a camping trip. Still, the safest thing to do is not go anywhere. Just shut yourself up in your house. Maybe so. The outside world is full of danger, you know? Still, why did this have to happen to us? It makes no sense at all. What a waste of a summer break. Yeah. If that transfer student hadn't started talking to May, you know the talisman would have worked too. And maybe, yeah. I think the tactical officers are at fault here too. If they had handled things right from the start, they could have explained to the transfer kid what was going on before he came to school or something. Yeah, but it doesn't do much good complaining about it now. I guess. We didn't believe people were actually going to die like that. They did either, I suppose. Seriously, I never thought things would turn out like this. Insert ellipses here for time skip. The instruction sheet came here for the camping trip. Yeah. What are you going to do? You're not going? No. Oh, hey there, Mr. Class Representative. You're a tactical officer too, aren't you? Aren't you kind of obligated to go? But you're scared? You think something's gonna happen on this trip? No, it's not that I heard this is actually effective. What do you mean? I heard this camping trip really means something. Miss Mikami even said it's a very important ritual. And actually, I talked to Sakaki about this after class and he told me... Another ellipses for a time skip. The 8th to the 10th. Those are the same dates as the camping trip 15 years ago, right? Yeah, that's right. Aren't we going to visit the Yomiyama Shrine too? That's the plan at least. On the second day, the 9th. That seems to be what they did when they went 15 years ago. But 15 years ago, there was an accident that day, and I know. Mr. Chibiki showed me his binder, but you know, since we're giving this a try, I think we need to do everything we can to match the conditions from before. So then why didn't you explain that to everyone after the end of semester assembly? Well, because I didn't feel confident enough. I wasn't sure if this really was an important ritual, or if this would be capable of stopping the disasters for this year, or how much hope I should let myself have. I struggled with it, so that's all I could manage at the time. So you're not struggling with it anymore? I don't know. But if there's even a slight chance this might work, that's better than to keep doing nothing. That's how I feel about it. Another ellipses for a time skip. Maybe I'd better go on that camping trip after all. Why are you bringing that up again? Somehow I keep thinking, maybe it'll save us. You think it might save us? I heard a rumor about it. I mean, there's that shrine in Yomiyama, right? And they're going there on a camping trip, and they're going to do a purification ritual. Really? And there was a class a long time ago it got saved. Are you serious? I just heard the rumor. So what are you gonna do? Who do you think is going? Akazawa said she's going. She said it's her responsibility as a class representative and a tactical officer. Sugiura is going too. Sugiura is so Akazawa's right hand, don't you think? I think Nakau's going too. What? To get him with Akazawa? Totally. Oh, my queen, I shall accompany you. There's just something pitiful about that guy. Speaking of, isn't Mochizuki going too? He's in it for Miss Mikami, though. He is so obvious. Of course Sakakibara's going. I wonder if Misaki is. Who knows? If she's going, I don't think I want to. But it doesn't matter anymore, remember? The talisman of her being not there is over now. And that's true, but come on. Don't you think she's kind of, I don't know, hard to be around? I feel like she looks at people so coldly. You can't handle that? It's not that I can't handle that, it's just creepy. Back in elementary school, there was a girl in my class who looked a lot like her. You mean Misaki? Yeah. But isn't she an only child? She had a different last name, but I'm pretty sure her first name was Misaki. Wow. Sometimes I still wonder if they're actually the same person. Where did she go to middle school? She moved away in 5th year, so I don't know. Did she wear an eye patch? I don't think she did. I heard Misaki lost her left eye when she was 4. Really? And then I guess... And... let me see. Yeah, that's a pretty good amount to read next time. So I will save this last final bit for next week's reading. And I'll just back over to our chill talk room so we can wrap up with a little bit of a chill talk before we wrap up the stream. Let me see. There we go. So, how did we enjoy that, guys? I feel like we really got caught up, and I'm really excited for next week so we can wrap up on a strong note for another. And then hopefully for, and I'm thinking for this upcoming Halloween season, since Halloween is right around the corner, we'll be reading another spooky story. And this one will be like a lot more blatantly Halloween themed and like, you know, kind of campy and such. It's going to be The Final Girl's Guide to Survival. Or let me see. Wait, hold on. I'm too lazy to go grab that book from the other side of my house in my bookcase. Let's see. I believe it's The Final Girl's Guide to Survival or something like that. We'll be getting into that. I'm really excited to read that one. I've been saying that repetitively throughout my reading streams, but I cannot express how excited I am to share that book with you and to experience it firsthand with everybody. So let's see. Tomorrow we will have an Undertale stream, finally again. It's been a while since we had an Undertale stream. We will have that tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so feel free to tune in tomorrow if you want to see me play more Undertale and keep pursuing the pacifist route, which I'm pretty sure that's the route I'm on, but I could be wrong. But, you know, we'll fuck around and find out. So, thank you guys so much for joining tonight's stream. I hope you guys really enjoyed your time here. Make sure to drink plenty of water, eat good food, enjoy the company around you, and I hope you guys have a wonderful night. Thank you so much again for joining, and you have a good night. Goodbye now.